You're listening to Chai Talk, a podcast about everything creative and meaningful. My name is Umar Ansari, and I'm a designer from Toronto, Canada. For the next 10 minutes, I'd like you to grab your favorite hot beverage and join me as I talk about interesting ideas for creating value and impact. Over the last few months, we've seen just how a global pandemic can change our day-to-day interactions, how it can influence our behavior with the things around us, and just how it can impact our everyday decisions. For one thing, we've never spent so much time at home collectively at once. The Globe and Mail published an article recently on July 1st, 2020, speaking about an interesting trend that seemed to arise during the pandemic. That trend being renovation and home improvement. Spending in this department actually boomed during the pandemic because people shifted their spending towards things that make their home more comfortable. That's what inspired me to talk about today's topic, minimalism. Now, for most of us, that means decluttering your space, throwing things out, and, for better or worse, trying to make your space look like it was lifted out of an IKEA catalog. So I decided to do some digging into what minimalism is really all about. And that's when I discovered a documentary on Netflix called, Minimalism by Matt Diavella. Highly recommend it. I'm gonna leave a link to that down in the show notes. It's about an hour and 20 minutes long, and the documentary really gives you a comprehensive look at everything that the concept of minimalism is comprised of. I personally really liked its selection of experts in the field of neuroscience and psychology, architecture, design, and business that were all brought in to discuss everything from sustainability to why we buy so many things and how much physical space do we actually need in our home to consider it, quote, livable. And you learn a lot in between shots of Joshua Fields Millburn and Ryan Nicodemus hitting the road to promote their book called Everything That Remains. Awesome book, highly recommended. I'm going to leave a link to that in the show notes too. And you learn particularly about their past, their relationships with their loved ones, and how they decided to really let go of things. I'm not going to dive too much into that in this episode because I really want you to watch this movie yourself. But I personally learned a lot. For one thing, there's a template for everything that we follow, right? Whether knowingly or unknowingly, we follow a set of ideals that dictate how we're expected to act in the world. I know, that's deep. But one of these so-called templates has led us to believe that by having more, we will be happier. There's a really cool Jim Carrey quote that's brought up in the movie. It goes, "I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything that they ever dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer." And this is actually empirically true. There have been a few studies that prove this, that money can only buy happiness up to a certain threshold. There's a study conducted by Purdue University, published in 2018 by the Department of Psychological Sciences there, that concluded that the ideal income is anywhere from $60,000 to $75,000 annually. That's all you need to maintain your emotional well-being. Now, this was based on a poll sample of 1.7 million people across 164 countries. I mentioned earlier this question around how much space do you actually need in a home to consider it, quote, livable? Well, I find this particularly interesting, probably because I'm a designer and have an affinity for understanding how we interact with things around us. So they actually did a study to try to understand where people spend the most time in their homes. And so they followed around a family of 4 and created a heat map of various hotspots in their house. Now, what they found is that the family used maybe 40% of their space. People either spent most of their time in the kitchen, the family room, or naturally, the bathroom. Nobody used the dining room. I mean, of course, that varies from family to family, and there are a lot of factors that need to be considered here, but the point is this. The amount of physical room that we actually need and use on a daily basis is far less than we think. Speaking of physical room or livable space, we often complain about the lack of it after we've stuffed it with too many things. Maybe we simply don't have a very good relationship with things to begin with. Next time we're browsing around at a store, whether it's physically or more than likely on the web using the plethora of shopping platforms out there, we very rarely stop to ask ourselves, how will this add value to my life? Will the novelty of this thing that I want to get wear off in an unjustifiably short period of time? More often than not, the answer is probably not one we like the sound of. Perhaps it's true that we buy based upon emotion and use logic and reason to justify our purchases. Maybe next time we shouldn't be too afraid to swallow the red pill, so to speak, and admit that what I really want to buy may not be what I need right now. Otherwise, we risk following a perpetual cycle that leads us to the, quote, unbearable heaviness of clutter, according to a New York Times article published in January 2019, which cites a study conducted by Professor Joseph Ferrari, awesome name by the way. He's a psychology professor at DePaul University in Chicago. After questioning 3 groups of adults about clutter and life satisfaction, his study concluded that a cluttered home is a stressful home. Even from a holistic medicine perspective, particularly one that is derived from traditional Chinese medicine, the importance of organizing your environment is critical to one's own health and happiness. It's also believed that stress caused by excessive clutter and a disorganized living space can mentally slow us down, draining our energy and eventually leading to things like sleep deprivation and heart disease. And before we allow ourselves to become consumed by too many things, maybe we need to start to apply some aspect of minimalism into our lives. In its entirety, minimalism is a lifestyle, and bringing about any lifestyle change can be cumbersome, to say the least. I mentioned Joshua Fields Millburn and Ryan Nicodemus earlier in this episode. Well, their book, Everything That Remains, is the premise for the Netflix documentary, Minimalism. And one of the many lessons you learn in the book is that perhaps it'll seem less like a chore if we approached adopting the minimalism lifestyle as a test of sorts, just to see if it makes an impact and whether it's right for us. As with any lifestyle, minimalism opens us up to learning more about just the types of changes we're really capable of making. It teaches us that, to quote the book, we can reprogram ourselves. Similarly, we can change our patterns. When we remove a habit from our lives, we become acutely aware of how that habit affected us. That it's not that hard to give up anything when you live in the real world. I'm Omar Ansari. If you found anything of value in this episode of Chai Talk, make sure to spread the word and subscribe for more. Thank you for stopping by.